Marcus Johnson was the only black student in his calculus class, and the smartest, but every time he raised his hand, his teacher looked past him. Every test he aced was marked with doubt, every answer twisted into a joke. And then one day, in front of the entire class, the teacher handed him an equation no student had ever solved, a trap designed to break him. What Marcus did next left the room in silence, because no one was ready for the truth. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. Marcus Johnson sat in the third row of room 214, the calculus classroom that felt less like a place of learning and more like a silent arena. 16 years old, wiry and sharp-eyed, he carried with him the kind of quiet brilliance that should have lit up the space. But brilliance meant nothing in a room where he was invisible. His raised hand seemed like air. His test scores seemed to evaporate before they landed on the teacher's desk. His voice, when he tried to use it, went ignored. Mr. Thompson, the calculus teacher, was a tall man with graying hair and the calm, authoritative voice of someone who never had to shout to be heard. His cruelty didn't come in the form of yelling or open insults. No, his weapon was dismissed. A smirk here, a sigh there, a sudden pivot to another student when Marcus spoke. It was quiet warfare, undeniable to those who experienced it, but almost impossible to prove. The other students noticed. They always did. In classrooms, children learn quickly whom teachers respect and whom they don't. When Marcus's answers were ignored, so were his peers' eyes. When Marcus's suggestions went unheard, his classmates laughed, but not maliciously. It was the laughter of a room following the lead of the person in power. And Marcus, despite his age, understood it. He had seen it before, outside school, the way clerks followed his father in the grocery store. The way his mother's carefully chosen words at a bank meeting were cut short, redirected, as if she hadn't spoken at all. The world taught Marcus early that silence wasn't always chosen. It was forced. Still, he fought in the only way he could: numbers. In the back of his notebooks beyond the assigned problems, he scribbled out equations just to see how far he could push himself. Sometimes, long after finishing homework, he would take a problem apart, reassemble it, and challenge himself to solve it again from a new angle. It wasn't just about learning math. It was about proving to himself that he existed, that he had a mind worth hearing. But in the classroom, Mr. Thompson's voice drowned everything. One Tuesday morning, when the leaves outside had turned brittle with the October chill, Marcus raised his hand to answer a derivative problem scrawled across the whiteboard. His hand was steady, his gaze fixed, certain he had the right answer. Miss Thompson glanced in his direction, paused, then called on another student in the front row. "Rachel," he said warmly, as if Marcus hadn't even been there. Rachel fumbled with the answer, mumbling something half correct. Mr. Thompson nodded approvingly, gently guiding her toward the solution. Marcus lowered his hand, heat creeping up his neck. A boy 2 seats behind him whispered, "Why you even bother, man?" The words weren't cruel, they were resigned. Marcus knew why he bothered. Because every problem he solved was a private rebellion. At home, his parents told him again and again, "Don't let them shrink you." His father, a mechanic who worked late into the night, often came home with grease-stained hands and stories of customers who doubted his skill until they saw the finished work. His mother, a nurse, carried herself with a poise that made Marcus believe strength could be silent, but undeniable. Together they filled his head with lessons sharper than any textbook. But those lessons clashed daily with the walls of room 2114. Their strength looked like arrogance, intelligence looked like insolence, and silence was survival. One afternoon, after class dismissed, Marcus lingered, packing his bag slowly. He wanted to ask Mr. Thompson for extra credit work, not because he needed it, but because he wanted to show his dedication. When the last student left, Marcus approached the desk. "Mr. Thompson," he began quietly, "I was wondering if I could get some additional problems to work on. Something advanced." The teacher looked up, his eyes narrowing just slightly, as if Marcus had spoken out of turn. "Advanced problems?"
Yes, sir. I just want to...
"Marcus," Mr. Thompson interrupted, his tone light but sharp, "I think you should focus on mastering the basics first. Let's not get ahead of ourselves." Marcus felt the words like a slap. He was mastering the basics. He had already moved past them weeks ago. But here in this room, his progress was irrelevant. "All right," Marcus murmured, retreating. That night, he opened his notebook and without instruction began teaching himself integration techniques he hadn't yet encountered in class. If no one would give him the problems, he would find them himself. Weeks passed like this, Marcus growing sharper in silence, Mr. Thompson sharpening his dismissals. It was almost theatrical, the way the teacher would skip Marcus's raised hand, then call on someone else with exaggerated warmth. Other students started to expect it. Some even joked, "Thompson, don't see you, man," when Marcus's hand went up. It wore on him, not the math, that part he loved, but the weight of invisibility. He wondered sometimes if he could shout the right answer, leap from his chair, carve the numbers into the desk itself, and still Mr. Thompson would glance past him, as if nothing had been said. But then came the day when the game changed. It was a Wednesday morning, the kind where the air felt too sharp for October, crisp enough to sting the lungs. The class was restless, pencils tapping, eyes on the clock. Mr. Thompson stood at the front, a piece of chalk in hand, his face carrying a particular look Marcus had come to recognize, the look of a man about to make an example of someone. "Class," Mr. Thompson announced, his voice cutting through the chatter. "Today I want to try something different." He turned to the board and began writing. The chalk screeched, dragging out symbols and numbers that looked more suited for a college course than high school calculus. The problems sprawled across the board like a labyrinth, dense, intimidating, uninviting. When he finally stepped back, dusting his hands, he said, "This equation," pausing for effect, "is one that even some of my graduate-level students used to struggle with." The class went quiet. Eyes widened. And Mr. Thompson continued, pacing slowly, "I think it would be instructive if one of you tried to solve it, to see what it really means to grapple with complexity." Marcus sat perfectly still. He knew the setup. He felt it in his bones. The teacher scanned the room, his gaze drifting casually past the eager faces in the front, past the quiet students in the back. Then his eyes landed exactly where Marcus sat. "Marcus," Mr. Thompson said smoothly, "why don't you give this a try?" Heads turned instantly. A ripple of whispers spread through the room. Some students smirked, already certain of what was about to happen. Others looked away, uncomfortable, as if watching a staged humiliation. Marcus's heart pounded in his chest. He had expected the dismissal. He hadn't expected this. The impossible equation glared at him from the board, a challenge not just in numbers but in power. And as Marcus slowly stood, every eye in the classroom fixed on him, what none of them knew, what even Mr. Thompson didn't realize, was that Marcus had already seen a version of this equation before. Scribbled in the margins of his late-night notes, Marcus carried the echo of the classroom home with him. That afternoon, the murmurs of classmates, the sly smile on Mr. Thompson's face, the equation still stamped in his mind like a scar he couldn't rub away. His backpack felt heavier than usual, though inside it were only papers and books. By the time he stepped through the door of his family's modest two-bedroom apartment, the mask of silence was firmly in place. "Hey, champ," his father's voice boomed from the kitchen, warm and grounding. Calvin Johnson was a tall man, with shoulders built from years of labor at the auto shop. His hands, scarred from engines and machines, held a gentleness that surprised people who only saw the surface. "You look like the world sat on you today. That teacher giving you a hard time again." Marcus hesitated, setting his backpack down by the couch. His father didn't miss much. "It's fine," Marcus muttered, though his tone betrayed the weight pressing on him. "Fine," Calvin chuckled softly, shaking his head as he stirred a pot of stew on the stove. "That's a word folks use when they're one step away from breaking. Sit down, boy. Tell me what's what." Before Marcus could answer, his mother emerged from the hallway, still in her scrubs from the hospital. Evelyn Johnson's face carried the quiet fatigue of a nurse who had spent 12 hours on her feet, but her eyes lit up when she saw her son. "Baby, you okay?" she asked, pulling him into a hug before he could object. "You got that look again. The one where you've been swallowing words all day." Marcus sat at the kitchen table, the scent of cornbread fresh from the oven filling the air. It was home. Safe. But even here, the shadow of room 214 followed him. "Mr. Thompson," Marcus began slowly, "he asked me to solve this equation today. In front of everyone. But it wasn't just any problem. It was impossible. Or at least that's what he wanted it to be." His father's brow furrowed, the easy smile fading. "He singled you out?" Marcus nodded. "Yeah." Everyone was staring, some of them laughing. "He wanted me to mess up, Dad. He wanted me to look stupid." For a long moment the kitchen was quiet except for the bubbling of stew. Then Calvin leaned forward, resting his calloused hand on Marcus's shoulder. "Son, listen to me. The world's been doing this to us for generations. They'll stack the deck against you and then act surprised when you don't win. They'll hand you an impossible problem and wait for you to collapse under it. But let me tell you something." His voice dropped lower, steady, strong. "You'll have to work twice as hard just to be seen. But when you do, when you shine, no one can take that truth away." Ellen reached across the table, her hand finding Marcus's. "He's right. Remember what I always tell you. Your mind is a gift. Don't let anyone trick you into thinking it's less than that. Not even a teacher." Marcus looked at them both, the fire of their words battling the cold sting of humiliation still lodged in his chest. He wanted to believe them. He wanted to believe that hard work, brilliance, resilience, all of it, was enough. But experience had taught him differently. "Sometimes it feels like it doesn't matter what I do," Marcus admitted quietly. "Like no one will ever believe me anyway." Ellen's eyes softened. "Then you do it for you, not for them, not for Mr. Thompson. You prove it to yourself first. That's the only way they can't take it away." Dinner passed in that rhythm, words of encouragement wrapped around spoonfuls of stew, gentle laughter attempting to break the heaviness. But later that night, as Marcus sat in his room, his parents' voices echoed louder than his doubts. He pulled out his worn spiral notebook, flipping through pages filled with his midnight scribbles, derivatives, integrals, theorems. His handwriting was cramped, equations sprawling into margins as though the paper could barely contain his thoughts. He paused on one page near the back, one he hadn't looked at in weeks. There, scrawled almost carelessly, was an equation he had once stumbled across online and tried to rework on his own. It wasn't identical, but it bore a striking resemblance to the impossible problem Miss Thompson had written on the board. Marcus's heart raced. The structure was familiar, the nested functions, the layers that looked impenetrable until you peeled them back one by one. He had wrestled with it late one night, half dreaming, pencil tapping against the desk, until his eyes grew heavy. At the time he hadn't solved it fully, but now he saw it with new eyes. "Wait," he whispered to himself, leaning closer. "If I take it from the inside out instead of left to right." The numbers began to dance differently. What once looked like a dead end started to open, piece by piece. He scribbled, erased, scribbled again, his notebook filling with lines of work. The problem wasn't impossible. It was just disguised, wrapped in unnecessary steps to intimidate, not to enlighten. For the first time all day, Marcus smiled, a real smile. But as he leaned back in his chair, a thought intruded, sharp and unsettling. If Mr. Thompson knows this problem can be solved, then maybe he doesn't want anyone to solve it. Maybe he just wants me to fail in front of everyone. The idea lodged in his chest like a thorn, and yet another thought rose to meet it. What if I don't fail? What if I walk into that classroom tomorrow and prove him wrong in front of everyone? The clock ticked past midnight as Marcus's pencil scratched furiously across the paper. His room, dimly lit by the desk lamp, became a battlefield of numbers and determination. His parents' voices echoed in his mind. "Work twice as hard. Do it for yourself." And then, halfway through his notes, Marcus froze. His eyes widened. In his scrawls, in the middle of the reworked equation, he noticed something he had never seen before, a hidden symmetry that tied the problem together in a way that seemed almost elegant, almost intentional. It wasn't just solvable, it was beautiful, but that beauty carried a strange edge. Because tucked inside that symmetry was an alternate path to the answer, a shortcut so clean, so efficient, that Marcus wondered if even Mr. Thompson himself had ever seen it. He stared at the notebook, heart pounding louder than the ticking clock. Tomorrow, in front of the entire class, he would have a choice: solve the equation, step by step the way the teacher expected, or reveal the shortcut that could shatter every assumption about what he was capable of. As Marcus set his pencil down, the realization chilled him. If he revealed the shortcut, he wouldn't just be solving the problem, he'd be exposing his teacher. The next morning, Marcus walked into room 214, with his notebook pressed tightly against his chest. He had hardly slept. The symmetry he had uncovered the night before still pulsed in his mind like a secret melody only he could hear. He felt both terrified and electrified. Terrified of being forced into the trap Thompson had laid, but electrified by the knowledge that he had a way through it, maybe even a way beyond it. But when he stepped into the classroom, all that fire dimmed against the cold familiarity of the space. The desks were lined up neatly, the fluorescent lights humming faintly overhead, and Mr. Thompson stood at the front, arranging papers with deliberate calm. His gray hair caught the light in thin streaks, his tie perfectly knotted, his glasses perched with precision. He looked every bit the respectable teacher. And yet, behind that composure, Marcus had learned to see the blade. Mr. Thompson glanced up briefly. As Marcus walked in, the corner of his mouth lifted, not in welcome but in acknowledgement, the kind of smile that seemed to say, "I see you, but only on my terms." It was fleeting, but Marcus felt the sting of it just the same. "Morning," Marcus said quietly. The teacher didn't respond. By the time the bell rang, the class was buzzing. Students shuffled notebooks, whispered about weekend plans, and tapped pencils impatiently. Mr. Thompson raised a hand for silence, his voice smooth, professional. "Settle down, everyone. Today we're going to build on yesterday's lesson." Marcus stiffened. Yesterday's lesson, the impossible equation. Mr. Thompson began walking between the rows, speaking with an ease that carried authority. Mathematics, as you know, isn't just about memorizing formulas. It's about discipline. It's about learning the boundaries of your mind. Some of you may think you're ahead of the curve, but mathematics has a way of humbling us all. The words hung heavy. Students glanced sideways, some stifling laughs, others simply smirking. They knew who those words were aimed at. Marcus kept his gaze on his desk, his pencil tapping against the wood. Mr. Thompson stopped at Marcus's row. "Marcus," he said suddenly, the tone deceptively light, "would you remind the class what the derivative of sine is?" Marcus blinked, caught off guard by the simplicity of the question. It was something he could answer in his sleep. "Cosine," he replied firmly. Mr. Thompson nodded, then smirked. "Correct. At least we've got the basics down today." His eyes scanned the room, inviting a quiet chuckle from a few students. The sting was immediate. It wasn't about whether Marcus was right. It was about how Mr. Thompson framed the answer. A simple acknowledgement wasn't enough. It had to be wrapped in sarcasm, disguised as lightheartedness, but carrying the weight of ridicule. Now the teacher continued, strolling back toward the board. "As I was saying, mathematics humbles us. That's why it's important to understand the limits of what you know." Marcus gripped his pencil tighter. He understood what was happening. Every move, every word, it was part of a performance. A subtle war waged not with open insults, but with carefully placed barbs. The teacher's authority was the shield, his cruelty, the sword, and Marcus was the target. But Marcus wasn't the only one who noticed. Rachel, the girl from the front row who had fumbled the problem the day before, glanced back at him briefly. Her eyes flickered with something, sympathy, maybe even guilt. She had seen the way Mr. Thompson skipped over Marcus's hand. She had seen the smirk. But like everyone else, she stayed quiet. To speak up against a teacher was unthinkable. The class carried on in this rhythm. Marcus answered when called. Each time correct, each time met with faintly mocking approval. "Good. See, even Marcus can follow that. Not bad. Almost like you prepared ahead of time." Each comment was precise, designed not to acknowledge his knowledge but to belittle it in front of peers. By the time the clock inched toward the halfway mark, Marcus's chest burned. He wanted to shout. He wanted to throw the symmetry from his notebook on the board and prove once and for all that he wasn't the fool Mr. Thompson painted him to be. But he stayed silent. He had learned silence could sometimes be its own rebellion. And then, as if sensing Marcus's restraint, Mr. Thompson struck harder. "Yesterday," he said casually, picking up a piece of chalk, "we attempted a rather complex problem. Unfortunately, we didn't quite have time to see it through." He began scrawling the symbols across the board again, the chalk squealing against the surface. "Some of you may have been overwhelmed, and that's perfectly understandable. After all, not everyone here is destined to grasp higher mathematics." The words were coded in civility, but the dagger was clear. Marcus's jaw clenched. Mr. Thompson turned back to the class, dusting his hands. "But perhaps today, one of you will surprise me. Let's see." His eyes swept the room deliberately, pausing just long enough to build suspense. Then, like the final move of a chess game, his gaze landed exactly where everyone expected. "Marcus," he said, his voice smooth, calm, calculated. "Why don't you come to the board and give this one a try? Show us what you've got." A wave of murmurs broke across the room. Some students leaned forward, intrigued. Others leaned back, ready for the show. It was clear this wasn't just about solving a problem. It was about survival. Marcus's heart thudded, but something inside him shifted. This was it. The moment his parents' words, his late-night scribbles, his hidden symmetry had prepared him for. He rose slowly, notebook in hand, every step toward the board, feeling like the march of someone entering an arena. But then something unexpected happened. As Marcus reached the front, Mr. Thompson leaned closer, lowering his voice so only Marcus could hear. "Careful," he murmured with a smirk. "One wrong move, and everyone will see exactly what I see." The words landed like a strike. It wasn't just about proving himself. It was about exposure. Mr. Thompson wanted him to fail publicly, to confirm the narrative he had been quietly building all semester, that Marcus was out of his depth, that his brilliance was an illusion. Marcus stared at the problem on the board, chalk in hand, the room behind him humming with anticipation. He could feel their eyes pressing into his back. His fingers trembled slightly, but his mind was alive with the symmetry he had discovered. He could solve it. He knew he could. But then his eyes caught something in the equation. Something different. A small change. A detail shifted from yesterday. Mr. Thompson hadn't written the problem exactly as before. He had altered it. And in that moment, Marcus realized the teacher wasn't just testing his knowledge. He was rewriting the rules of the game. Right there in plain sight. Marcus froze at the board, staring at the problem that was almost but not quite the same as the one from yesterday. One symbol had shifted, an exponent altered. A subtle change designed to derail him. He felt the room's collective breath pressing against him, waiting for his stumble. But he didn't stumble. Something inside him snapped into clarity. He recognized what Mr. Thompson was doing. Moving the target. It wasn't about math anymore. It was about control. Marcus adjusted his grip on the chalk. He didn't solve it right there, not yet. Instead, he wrote a few starting steps with deliberate slowness, his hand steady, his breathing even. Enough to show he wasn't paralyzed. Enough to remind the room he wasn't afraid of the problem. Then, before the silence could stretch too long, he set the chalk down and said calmly, "I'd like to check this against my notes before finishing." A ripple went through the class. Students exchanged glances. Who asked a teacher for time to check notes in the middle of a lesson? Mr. Thompson smirked, satisfied. "That's fine, Marcus. We'll give someone else a chance." The dismissal stung, but Marcus's silence carried a quiet defiance. He wasn't giving the teacher the public failure he wanted. He returned to his seat, every eye still on him, every whisper digging at his pride. But inside he felt something new, not humiliation but resolve. That night, when he opened his notebook at his desk, the fire inside him roared. He worked until his hand cramped, scribbling equations, erasing, rewriting, pushing beyond what the class had even touched. He wasn't just doing homework anymore. He was building armor. Night after night, Marcus grew sharper. He dove into online lectures, scoured free textbooks he found on library websites, and practiced problems far above his grade level. While his classmates skimmed the assigned chapters, Marcus was unraveling college-level calculus, step by step. At home, his parents noticed the change. "You've been up past midnight 3 nights in a row," his mother said, standing in his doorway one evening. "Baby, you need rest too. Don't let that teacher push you to the point where you burn out." Marcus looked up from his notebook, eyes gleaming with determination. "Mom, I'm not doing this for him. I'm doing it for me." Ellen paused, seeing in her son the same fire she had once seen in her husband, when Calvin fought to open his own small repair shop, despite banks denying his loan applications 3 times. She smiled faintly, though worry lingered in her eyes. "All right, but promise me one thing. Don't just fight to prove him wrong. Fight to prove yourself right." Marcus nodded, the words etching themselves deep into him. Meanwhile, in class, the subtle war continued. Mr. Thompson kept up his performance, skipping Marcus's hand, mocking correct answers, dismissing him with faint praise. But beneath it, Marcus began to notice something. His teacher's smirk wasn't always confident. There were moments, brief but telling, when Marcus's quiet resilience unsettled him. It became a game of tension. Marcus would raise his hand, not expecting to be called on, but refusing to lower it. He would answer softly under his breath, just loud enough for those around him to hear, and they would realize he had it right again. The whispers spread slowly. Marcus wasn't failing. He wasn't even struggling. The twist came one Thursday morning. The class was working through a set of practice problems. Mr. Thompson paced the aisles, scanning papers, offering sharp corrections. When he stopped by Marcus's desk, he picked up the notebook, flipping through it without permission. His eyes lingered on the back pages, the ones filled with dense advanced calculations Marcus had been teaching himself. "What's this?" Mr. Thompson asked, his voice smooth but edged. "Just practice," Marcus replied, keeping his voice even. The teacher flipped another page, his brow furrowing as the scribbles grew more complex. He looked at Marcus for a long moment, then closed the notebook with a snap. "Ambition is dangerous when it outruns ability," he said quietly, but loud enough for nearby students to hear. The words stung, but the look in Mr. Thompson's eyes betrayed something else: unease. He had seen the pages. He knew Marcus was pushing far beyond what he taught in class. That night, Marcus doubled down. His father found him at the desk, pencil smudges on his fingers, equations spilling across torn sheets. Calvin leaned on the doorframe, watching his son with pride. "You're building something here, son," he said softly. "Just don't forget, when people feel threatened by your gift, they'll try to turn it into a weapon against you. Don't let them." Marcus looked up, exhaustion and determination mixing in his face. "I won't, Dad." Weeks passed in this rhythm. Marcus endured the subtle humiliations by day and sharpened his brilliance by night. He wasn't keeping up with the curriculum anymore. He was outrunning it. Every cruel smirk from Mr. Thompson fueled him. Every skipped hand became another late-night session. The more the teacher tried to corner him, the more determined Marcus became. And then, one Friday morning, Mr. Thompson stood at the front of the room with an unusual air of anticipation. He picked up a piece of chalk, tapping it lightly against the board. The students fell silent. "Today," he announced, "we're going to do something different." His tone was calm, but there was a gleam in his eyes that Marcus recognized instantly. The gleam of a man setting a trap. He turned and began writing. The chalk screeched as a new equation sprawled across the board, more complex than anything they had seen so far. The room buzzed with whispers. When he finished, Mr. Thompson faced the class. "This," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, "is the hardest problem I have ever written. And today, one of you will solve it." Marcus's chest tightened. He knew exactly what this meant. The teacher wasn't just testing the class. He was preparing a public demonstration, and Marcus already knew whose name was about to be called. The following morning, the air in room 2114 carried a strange charge. It wasn't the usual restlessness of a class waiting for the bell to ring, or the drone of a teacher's voice to fade into background noise. This was different. This was expectation. Students shuffled into their seats whispering, some with curiosity, others with amusement, and a few with the quiet discomfort of people who knew something unfair was about to happen, but weren't willing to stop it. They had seen the way Mr. Thompson worked. They knew how his challenges weren't random. They knew how Marcus's raised hand was always skipped, how his correct answers were always twisted into backhanded compliments. And now, with the hardest problem he had ever written scrawled across the board in jagged chalk marks, they knew exactly who was about to be called forward. Marcus sat in the third row, silent, his notebook closed but his mind racing. His parents' words still echoed in him. "Do it for yourself. Work twice as hard. Don't let them shrink you." He clung to those reminders like armor. But even armor could feel heavy under the weight of 30 pairs of eyes, all of them silently waiting to see whether he would rise or crumble. Mr. Thompson stood at the front of the class, chalk in one hand, eraser in the other. His posture was casual, but his eyes flickered with that familiar gleam Marcus had come to dread. It was the look of someone about to orchestrate a spectacle. He tapped the chalk against the board, as though punctuating his control over the room. "Mathematics," he began smoothly, "isn't about shortcuts. It's about discipline, about patience, about learning from failure." He let that last word hang in the air, heavy and deliberate. Marcus felt the sting. The word wasn't aimed at the class. It was aimed at him. A boy in the back row leaned over to his friend, whispering just loud enough for Marcus to catch. "Bet he crashes this time." His friend snickered, shaking his head. "Dudes all talk." Rachel, seated in the front row, didn't laugh. She kept her gaze fixed on the problem, chewing her pencil nervously. Her eyes flickered once toward Marcus, and though she said nothing, the sympathy in her glance was louder than any whisper. The problem on the board loomed larger than any they had seen before. Layers of nested functions, exponents stacked on exponents, parentheses wrapped like puzzles within puzzles. It looked impossible, exactly as intended. Mr. Thompson paced slowly, his shoes clicking against the tile. "This," he said, gesturing at the problem, "is what separates those who truly understand mathematics from those who only think they do. Solving it requires not just knowledge, but clarity of mind under pressure." He let his eyes scan the classroom, pausing just long enough to build suspense. The silence thickened, breaths caught in throats, pencils stilled against paper. And then, inevitably, his gaze landed where everyone knew it would. "Marcus," Mr. Thompson said, his tone deceptively warm, "why don't you show us how it's done?" The room exhaled in unison. Whispers erupted instantly, some amused, others almost pitying. "Oh man, he's dead. No way he gets that right. Why does he always pick him?" Marcus swallowed hard. His palms were damp against the surface of his desk, his heart beat thunderous in his ears. He had known this moment was coming. He had prepared for it. And yet, knowing didn't make the reality any lighter. Slowly, he rose from his chair. The sound of the legs scraping against the tile echoed louder than he expected, like an announcement. Every eye followed him as he walked toward the front. He felt their gaze like heat pressing into his back. Some curious, some cruel, some quietly willing him to succeed even if they would never say it out loud. Mr. Thompson handed him the chalk with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Take your time," he said smoothly. The words coated in false encouragement. "We'll all be watching." Marcus's fingers closed around the chalk. It felt brittle, fragile, ready to snap under too much pressure. He turned to face the board, the symbols sprawling before him like a wall daring him to climb. For a moment, the classroom disappeared. He wasn't standing in front of peers. He wasn't staring down his teacher's smirk. He was back in his bedroom the night before. Pencil scratching, numbers unraveling, the hidden symmetry revealing itself like a secret only he could see. He breathed in slowly, steadying himself. "Do it for you. Do it for yourself." The first line he wrote came easily, a derivative that peeled away one layer of the problem. A murmur went through the class. Some leaned forward, whispering to each other, surprised he hadn't frozen immediately. He wrote the second step, then the third. His hand grew steadier with each stroke. The board began to fill, not with hesitation, but with clarity. Behind him, Mr. Thompson's smirk faltered ever so slightly. But Marcus wasn't blind to the trap. He saw it. One exponent shifted, one term altered from the problem he had studied at home. It was a deliberate sabotage, designed to catch him halfway and unravel his logic in front of everyone. He hesitated, chalk hovering. The whispers swelled again. Students misinterpreting his pause as doubt. "Here it comes. Told you." Marcus clenched his jaw. He knew what Mr. Thompson wanted. Hesitation that would spiral into collapse. But Marcus also knew something else. Something the teacher didn't. The symmetry he had discovered in his notes could still save him. The altered term didn't break the equation. It simply rerouted the path. The shortcut still existed, hidden beneath the layers. His father's words echoed again. "They'll stack the deck against you. But when you shine, they can't take it away." Marcus adjusted his stance, shifted his chalk, and began down the alternate path. The board filled faster now, each step flowing into the next. His classmates leaned in, disbelief etching their faces. Rachel's eyes widened as she recognized the clarity in his work. The boy in the back who had bet on his failure sat up straighter, no longer smirking but frowning with confusion. And Mr. Thompson? He folded his arms, his face tightening. The smirk was gone. Step after step, Marcus dismantled the impossible problem. Then, with only a few strokes left, the chalk snapped in his hand. The sharp crack echoed through the classroom, pulling a gasp from students. Half the chalk clattered to the floor. Marcus froze, staring at the broken piece in his hand, the silence pressing heavy around him. It was a small thing, just a piece of chalk, but in that moment, it felt symbolic, like the universe itself waiting to see whether he would break alongside it. Slowly, Marcus bent to pick up the broken chalk, knowing the next stroke he wrote could either expose the teacher or expose himself. The broken chalk lay on the floor like a fallen weapon. Marcus bent slowly, his movements deliberate, his heart thundering against his ribs. The silence in the room was suffocating, broken only by the faint hum of the fluorescent lights above. 30 pairs of eyes drilled into his back, some eager for him to fail, some pitying, a few silently rooting for him, though none dared show it. When he straightened, the broken chalk piece rested in his fingers, sharp-edged and small. He glanced briefly at Mr. Thompson. The teacher stood at the front with arms folded across his chest, his lips curled into that familiar smirk. It wasn't cruel in the way most people thought cruelty worked. It was worse. It was the smirk of a man who had already decided the outcome. On the board, the problem loomed larger than life. Symbols layered over symbols, functions nested like traps within traps. To anyone else, it looked unsolvable, a deliberate design to overwhelm. To Marcus, it looked like a battlefield. He had seen enough of it in his notebook to recognize the structure. But here, on this board, in front of everyone, it was dressed to kill. He held the chalk tighter and took a step closer to the board. His heart pounded so hard he could hear it in his ears. Do it for you. Don't let him shrink you. His father's words rose up again, a shield against the fear clawing inside him. Behind him, the whispers began to return. He's stuck already. Knew it. No way he gets this. Why does Thompson keep picking him? Marcus blocked it out. He focused on the first step. He could see it in his mind, the way one piece peeled away like the first layer of an onion. Slowly, deliberately, he began to write. The chalk screeched faintly as he set the derivative in motion. The room fell quieter, the whispers shrinking into the sound of scratching chalk. Step 1. Correct. Step 2. Flowing. Step 3. The structure unfolded. A murmur rippled through the class. Students who had smirked moments ago now leaned forward, confusion knitting their brows. They expected stumbles, hesitation, collapse. Instead, Marcus's hand moved with confidence, revealing a rhythm few could deny. At the back of the room, a boy whispered, "Wait, he's actually doing it." Rachel in the front row glanced over her shoulder, her eyes wide with recognition. She wasn't a math prodigy, but even she could see it. Marcus wasn't lost. He wasn't drowning. He was in control. And that was exactly what unsettled Mr. Thompson. The teacher shifted in place, unfolding his arms, then refolding them. His smirk remained, but there was a new tightness in his jaw. He had expected hesitation, panic. Instead, Marcus was dismantling the impossible problem, with a clarity that couldn't be faked.
But then came the twist.
Midway through the problem, Marcus reached the altered term, the piece Mr. Thompson had changed from yesterday's version. The shortcut Marcus had discovered the night before was still possible, but only if he adapted quickly, rerouting his logic on the fly. One misstep here, one wrong sign, and the whole structure would collapse. He froze, chalk hovering inches from the board. The silence thickened. "There it is," someone whispered. "He's done." Mr. Thompson's smirk deepened, but Marcus didn't break. He closed his eyes briefly, inhaling deeply. He remembered his late-night scribbles, the hidden symmetry he had seen, the elegant shortcut most people would never even think to try. When he opened his eyes, the hesitation was gone. Instead of following the expected path, he veered. He took a different approach, one that looked strange to his classmates, even messy at first. Confused murmurs filled the room. What's he doing? That's not the right step. But then the lines began to connect. What looked like a detour was actually a straight road hidden inside the maze. Marcus's hand moved faster now, the chalk flowing across the board. Each step unraveled another layer of the so-called impossible equation. Gasps filled the room as realization spread. He wasn't failing. He was solving. Rachel's pencil slipped from her fingers and clattered onto her desk. The boy in the back who had bet against Marcus muttered, "No way. No way." And Mr. Thompson? His smirk had vanished. His eyes narrowed, jaw tight, as though each line Marcus wrote was an attack on his authority. With one final stroke, Marcus reached the answer. Clear, elegant, undeniable. The silence in the room was deafening. For a moment, no one moved. No one breathed. It was as if the entire class had been frozen in disbelief. Marcus lowered the chalk, his hand trembling slightly, his chest heaving with the weight of what he had just done. He had taken the impossible and made it possible, not in private, not in his notebook, but here, in the arena. His teacher had chosen to humiliate him. A few students clapped before catching themselves, unsure whether applause was allowed. Others whispered furiously, unable to reconcile what they had just seen with what they had expected. And then, cutting through it all, came the voice Marcus dreaded most. "Well," Mr. Thompson said slowly, his tone measured, "that was creative. Creative. Not correct. Not brilliant. Not extraordinary. Creative." The class stirred with unease. They knew what they had seen, But Mr. Thompson's words carried weight. His smirk had returned, softer now but still sharp. He wasn't about to let Marcus walk away with victory. Marcus's stomach tightened. He knew exactly what was coming next. Instead of praising him, Mr. Thompson was about to twist the triumph into suspicion and accuse Marcus of cheating. The chalk dust lingered in the air, faint but visible in the slanted morning light that cut through the blinds. Marcus still stood at the board, his answer staring back at the class in bold, undeniable clarity. The silence was not the silence of apathy. It was charged, tense, disbelieving, a silence that shifted the air itself. He turned slightly, his gaze sweeping across the room. Rows of faces were frozen mid-expression, some wide-eyed with astonishment, some tight-lipped with envy, others blinking as though they were trying to process what they had just witnessed. For a brief, fleeting moment, Marcus wasn't invisible, he wasn't overlooked or dismissed. He was the center. The boy no one had expected had just rewritten the script. And yet, standing only a few feet away, Mr. Thompson folded his arms tighter, the smirk returning like a shadow creeping across his face. "Well," the teacher said, his voice slow and deliberate. "That was certainly an attempt." The word attempt cut through the silence, like a blade. Students shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They had seen it. They had watched Marcus dismantle the impossible equation, line by line, without hesitation. But now, their teacher's framing demanded doubt. "Sir," Rachel spoke up suddenly, her voice small but steady. "He got it right. I was following along." All heads turned. Rachel rarely challenged authority. Her words landed in the room like a pebble dropped into still water. Mr. Thompson's smile tightened, though his eyes didn't soften. "Mathematics isn't about appearances, Rachel. Anyone can scribble steps. The question is whether those steps have integrity." He let the word integrity hang pointedly, a subtle jab disguised as professionalism. Marcus's stomach clenched. The accusation wasn't about the math. It was about him, his credibility, his very right to stand there. Whispers flared again. "Is he saying Marcus cheated?" "No way. But what if he did? Why would he cheat? He just did it in front of us." Marcus looked back at the board, his hands trembling. He wanted to speak, to defend himself, but every word he imagined sounded like desperation. He knew how it would play out. His teacher would dismiss him with calm authority, and Marcus's protests would only make him look guilty. Instead, he did something else. He turned back to the board, picked up the broken half of chalk, and began again. The room stilled. The whispers faded. Marcus's hand moved deliberately, retracing the path, step by step. He didn't rush. He didn't falter. Each line was clean, precise, undeniable. The deeper he went, the quieter the room became, until the only sound was the chalk scratching against the surface. This wasn't just math anymore. This was defiance. Every pause brought smirks from a few students, until the next line fell into place, silencing them again. Every murmur of doubt dissolved as his logic unfolded with unshakable clarity. It was as though the equation itself was testifying for him. Behind him, Mr. Thompson's composure began to crack. His eyes flickered, his jaw clenched. He stepped closer, looming like a shadow over Marcus's shoulder. But Marcus didn't stop. Rachel's eyes followed every stroke, her breath catching as the problem unraveled. Others leaned forward, pencils forgotten, caught in the strange spectacle of a boy they had dismissed, proving himself against impossible odds. And then, Marcus reached it. The turning point. The step where every expectation demanded failure. The altered exponent. The trap. The place where logic was meant to collapse. The class held its breath. This was the moment Mr. Thompson had built toward. The moment he had designed. Marcus paused. Chalk hovering. The weight of silence pressing down harder than ever. He could feel his classmates' stares burning into his back. Feel the teacher's breath sharp with anticipation. He knew what they were waiting for. They wanted to see whether he would falter. Instead, Marcus smiled faintly. He saw it again. The hidden symmetry from his notes. The elegant shortcut disguised as chaos. What Mr. Thompson had designed as a trap was, in truth, the key to unlocking the solution. He pressed the chalk to the board. One stroke. Gasps. Another stroke. Murmurs of disbelief. A third stroke. And the trap was gone. Dismantled. Exposed for what it was, not impossibility, but intimidation. The silence shifted again. Heavier now. No longer just anticipation but shock. The room felt like it was tilting. the authority at the front of the class slipping as Marcus rewrote the narrative of who he was in real time. Mr. Thompson's voice finally broke the silence. Low, tight. Enough. Marcus froze mid-step, the chalk still against the board. Sit down, the teacher said. His tone clipped. We'll revisit this later. The dismissal hung awkwardly in the air. Students looked from the board to Marcus to their teacher, the tension almost unbearable. Marcus hesitated, then slowly set the chalk down and returned to his seat. His classmates' eyes followed him, some with awe, some with confusion, some with something deeper, recognition that the boy they had laughed at wasn't who they thought he was. But Mr. Thompson's smirk didn't return this time. Instead, his eyes burned with something colder. Marcus had solved the impossible, but now he could feel it. The teacher wasn't finished. The real battle was only beginning, and the next strike wouldn't come from the chalkboard. The silence after Marcus's solution wasn't ordinary silence. It wasn't the kind of pause that came when a teacher asked a question no one wanted to answer, or when the bell threatened to ring at the end of class. It was heavier, sharper, the kind of silence that left the air brittle. Every student sat suspended in disbelief. On the board, the equation, once a fortress designed to intimidate, now stood dismantled. Each step flowed into the next, with a logic so clean it was impossible to deny. The answer glared from the final line, unshakable proof of Marcus's brilliance. Rachel broke the stillness first. A sharp inhale, almost like a gasp of relief. She looked around at her classmates, as if waiting for someone else to confirm what she had just seen. That's right, she whispered, her voice trembling. That's actually right. Her words rippled through the room like a current. Wait, no way. He did it? Holy, he actually solved it. Students leaned forward, craning their necks to take in the board, tracing Marcus's steps with wide eyes. The boy in the back who had bet against him shook his head slowly, his mouth half open. For once, there was no joke, no laughter, just awe. But one man could. Mr. Thompson stood stiff at the front of the classroom, his face frozen, his composure cracking. The smirk was gone, replaced by something harder to read, part disbelief, part irritation, part calculation. For years he had commanded this room with ease, his authority unquestioned, and now in a matter of minutes, a 16-year-old boy had shifted the balance. The teacher's silence stretched on too long. Students exchanged uncertain glances. They had seen teachers surprised before, but this wasn't surprise. This was something else. Finally, Mr. Thompson spoke. Well, he said slowly, his voice sharp enough to slice through the tension. It seems Marcus has found his way to an answer. Found his way. As though Marcus had stumbled on it by chance. As though it wasn't the product of late nights, brilliance, and grit. Whispers erupted again, this time tinged with unease. The class wanted recognition for what they had witnessed, but Mr. Thompson's words demanded caution. Sir, Rachel spoke again, her voice firmer now. He didn't just find his way. He solved it. You said yourself it was the hardest problem you'd written. And he solved it. The teacher's jaw tightened, though his smile remained. Rachel, mathematics requires precision. Yes, Marcus produced an answer, but creativity doesn't always equal correctness. There are questions about whether every step was valid. Marcus's chest tightened. The accusation was clear. He wasn't being dismissed for getting it wrong. He was being dismissed for daring to get it right. The boy in the back raised his hand cautiously. But I was watching. He didn't mess up. He got it. Several others nodded. The tide in the classroom was shifting. Authority was no longer absolute. Mr. Thompson's eyes swept the room, narrowing slightly. He felt it too. His grip on the narrative was slipping. And then, with a voice smooth and calm, he struck back. Of course, he said, pacing slowly. There's always another explanation. Sometimes students come across solutions online, or perhaps they've had outside help. It's not unheard of, especially when the steps look unusually rehearsed. The room gasped. It wasn't just doubt, it was accusation. Marcus's stomach dropped. His breath caught in his throat. Cheating? The word hadn't been spoken aloud, but it hovered over the room like a storm cloud. Whispers spread like wildfire. Is he saying Marcus cheated? No way. He did that right here. Yeah, but what if he memorized it? Marcus clenched his fists beneath his desk. He wanted to shout, to defend himself, but his father's voice whispered again, don't let them shrink you. If he exploded, if he begged, he'd look guilty. Instead, he sat still, eyes locked on the board, letting the proof of his work stand for itself. But the silence felt unbearable. Rachel's hand shot up again, this time with urgency. "That's not fair," she said, louder than before. "You watched him solve it. We all did. How could he cheat in front of everyone?" The class stirred, murmurs of agreement bubbling up. For the first time, the tide leaned toward Marcus, toward truth. Mr. Thompson didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His calm authority was its own weapon. "Rachel," he said firmly, "this isn't about fairness. It's about academic honesty. And I'll be reviewing Marcus's work carefully after class." The finality in his tone landed like a gavel. Students fell quiet again, tension winding tighter. Marcus sat frozen, anger simmering beneath his skin. He had done the impossible. He had shown them all. But instead of triumph, he was being pulled deeper into suspicion. His victory wasn't just denied, it was being twisted into a liability. And then came the twist. The classroom door opened, and the principal stepped inside. "Mr. Thompson," she said, her eyes scanning the room. "You asked me to stop by." Marcus's heart dropped. He realized with a chill that the accusation wasn't improvised. It was planned. The principal's arrival meant Marcus's battle wasn't just against whispers anymore. It was about to be written into official record. The principal's arrival sucked the air from the room. Mrs. Whitaker was not a woman who entered classrooms lightly. Her presence carried weight. Tall, sharp-eyed, with a voice that rarely needed to rise above even a whisper to command silence. Students straightened instinctively, whispers evaporating into the stillness. "Mr. Thompson?" she asked, her gaze flicking briefly toward Marcus before settling on the teacher. "You requested me?" Marcus's stomach twisted. The realization settled like a stone in his chest. This wasn't spontaneous. Mr. Thompson had planned this moment. He hadn't just set up the problem. He had orchestrated the fallout. "Yes," Mr. Thompson said smoothly, stepping forward, his hands clasped behind his back like a man in complete control. "We've just had an interesting situation. Marcus here attempted a very advanced problem on the board. His solution was, on the surface, impressive, but there are questions about whether it was truly his work." The word questions echoed in Marcus's ears, like a gavel striking wood. The students stirred uneasily. Some glanced at Marcus with doubt, others with quiet sympathy. Rachel's hand hovered near her desk, as though she wanted to speak again, but fear pinned her in place. Marcus's mouth opened, but the words stuck. If he protested, he'd sound defensive. If he stayed silent, the suspicion would grow. He was trapped in a silence, not of his making. Mrs. Whitaker turned her gaze toward him. Her expression was unreadable, professional to the point of coldness. "Marcus, is that correct? Did you work this out on your own?" The room froze, waiting. 30 pairs of eyes bore into him, demanding an answer. Marcus swallowed, forcing his voice to steady. "Yes, ma'am. I worked it out myself, step by step, just now." Mrs. Whitaker's face didn't move, but Mr. Thompson gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of his head, as if the boy's words only confirmed his doubts. "You see," Mr. Thompson added, his tone measured. The steps looked rehearsed, almost too polished. "And given Marcus's history of struggling with participation, I thought it best to call you in, to ensure we uphold academic integrity." The subtle cruelty landed like a hammer. He wasn't outright calling Marcus a cheater. He was painting him as suspicious. Marcus's classmates shifted in their seats. He could feel the tide turning, not against the math, but against him as a person. His very existence at the board had become threatening. Inside, his chest burned. He wanted to shout the truth, that he had spent nights alone with his notebook, pushing through problems no one had assigned him. That he had found the symmetry himself, discovered the shortcut through persistence, not theft. But the words caught in his throat. He knew how they'd sound: emotional, defensive, easily dismissed. Mrs. Whitaker studied him for a long moment, her eyes narrowing just slightly. "Marcus," she said evenly, "if you are as capable as this work suggests, you should be able to demonstrate it again. Not now." She held up a hand as whispers broke out. "But under formal conditions, a monitored evaluation." The class erupted into murmurs again. A test. An evaluation. It sounded official, damning. Marcus's heart sank. He had just done the impossible in front of everyone. And now it wasn't proof, it was the reason he was being put on trial. Rachel finally spoke, her voice trembling but resolute. "That's not fair. He just did it. We all Mrs. Whitaker turned toward her, her tone still calm. Fairness, Rachel, is making sure no student has an unfair advantage. If Marcus is as talented as you believe, then he'll have no trouble demonstrating it again under supervision. Her words, framed in reason, carried the weight of law. Marcus lowered his gaze, his fists clenching beneath the desk. Supervision. He wasn't being recognized for his brilliance. He was being treated like a suspect. The irony cut deep. His teacher had designed the problem to humiliate him. He had risen to the challenge, solved what was meant to be unsolvable. And now, instead of respect, he was being dragged into suspicion. His genius had crossed a line. It wasn't celebrated. It was threatening. At the front, Mr. Thompson clasped his hands tighter, his smirk carefully hidden behind professional neutrality. He had won this round. The principal straightened. "I'll be in touch with your parents, Marcus. We'll arrange a time for this evaluation." Her tone was final, not unkind, but unyielding. Marcus nodded stiffly, though his chest screamed with anger. Around him, classmates whispered. Some avoided his eyes. Others, like Rachel, looked at him with something close to sorrow. The bell rang, shattering the tension. Students gathered their things hurriedly, the air buzzing with gossip, as they spilled into the hallway. Marcus stayed behind, frozen in his seat, staring at the board where his victory had been erased into suspicion. Slowly, he packed his things, his notebook clutched tighter than ever. As he stepped toward the door, Mr. Thompson's voice followed him. Low, smooth, razor sharp. "Marcus," he said, just loud enough for the boy to hear. "Remember, truth always comes out." Marcus stopped, his chest burning. He wanted to turn to throw the truth back in his teacher's face. But he didn't. He walked out in silence, the weight of the trap settling heavier on his shoulders. Outside the classroom, Marcus didn't notice Rachel trailing after him, until she caught up and whispered something that changed everything. "Marcus, I think he planned this before you even solved it." Marcus walked home that day with his backpack heavier than usual. Not because of the books inside, but because of the silence pressing on him. Every step echoed with the whispers he'd overheard in the hallways. Cheater, show-off. How could he know all that? What should have been a triumph had twisted into a storm he couldn't control. When he opened the door to the apartment, his mother looked up from the couch immediately. She didn't need words to know something was wrong. "What happened?" Evelyn asked softly, her eyes narrowing as she studied her son's face. Marcus hesitated, but the weight was too much to carry alone. "They think I cheated, Mom. I solved the problem in class, and instead of giving me credit, Mr. Thompson called the principal. They're making me do a supervised test." His father's footsteps echoed from the kitchen. Calvin appeared in the doorway, a rag in one hand, grease still smudged on his knuckles from a long shift at the garage. "They did what?" His voice was sharp, low. "They don't believe me," Marcus said, his throat tightening. "They think I couldn't have done it by myself." For a moment, the room was silent, except for the hum of the fridge. Then Calvin sat down across from him, his jaw set. "Son, this world has always had a way of calling us liars when we tell the truth. They called me a liar when I said I could run a repair shop without college. They called your mama a liar when she said she could handle patients better than half the doctors she worked with. And now they're calling you one." Eleanor reached out, placing her hand over Marcus's. "But we know the truth. You've been doing this for years. You've got proof." Marcus frowned. "Proof? Your notebooks," she said firmly. "Every night you've sat at that desk filling page after page with numbers, steps, equations. That's your evidence. No one can take that from you." The words struck Marcus like a spark. He had never thought of his notebooks that way. To him they were just scribbles, private battles fought in the quiet of his room. But now they were more than that. They were testimony. The next morning, Marcus sat nervously in the principal's office. Mrs. Whitaker sat across from him, professional as always, her desk neatly arranged, her expression unreadable. Mr. Thompson stood near the bookshelf, arms folded, a silent presence of authority. "Marcus," Mrs. Whitaker began, "I want to give you the opportunity to clarify. If you truly solved that equation on your own, I'd like to understand how. Can you walk me through your process?" Marcus nodded slowly. He opened his backpack and pulled out the worn spiral notebooks. Some were bent at the corners, pages dog-eared, covers scuffed from years of being tossed into bags. He placed them on the desk, one after another, until there was a small stack between them. "These are mine," he said quietly. "I've been working through problems on my own for years. Not just homework, Things I find online, in old textbooks, anywhere I can. Last night, I was studying a problem almost like the one you gave us. He glanced at Miss Thompson briefly, his voice tightening. That's how I knew the symmetry. That's how I solved it. Mrs. Whitaker opened the first notebook carefully. The pages were filled edge to edge with numbers, formulas, diagrams. Not neat, not staged, raw, sprawling, authentic. She flipped to another, then another. The sheer volume of work was undeniable. Mr. Thompson shifted slightly, his jaw tightening. "Show me," Mrs. Whitaker said. Marcus leaned forward, pointing to a page near the back. "Here. This is the one I was working on. It's not the same as the classroom problem, but it's close. I didn't finish it last night, but it's where I realized the shortcut." He picked up a pencil and began retracing the steps slowly, narrating as he went. His voice was calm, steady. "See, if you start from the inside and collapse this part first, it looks impossible. But if you reframe it here," he drew a line through one section, simplifying it with practiced ease. "That's where the symmetry opens up. From there you just keep peeling it back." Mrs. Whitaker watched closely, her eyes following each step. For the first time, something softened in her expression. When Marcus finished, she sat back in her chair, tapping the pencil against her desk. "This isn't the work of someone copying solutions," she said finally. "This is thorough. Years of practice." Marcus felt his chest loosen slightly. Relief flickered, fragile but real. But Mr. Thompson's voice cut through before it could settle. "With respect," he said, his tone calm but clipped. "Raw scribbles don't prove authorship. Anyone could copy steps into a notebook. What matters is whether the student can perform under academic conditions, with accountability. That's why I still recommend a supervised evaluation." The relief drained from Marcus's chest instantly. Mrs. Whitaker folded her hands. "I agree that a supervised test would remove any doubt. Marcus, you've shown me impressive work here. If you're able to replicate it under those conditions, this will all be settled." Marcus nodded faintly. He had no choice. The meeting ended with a polite dismissal. But as Marcus packed his notebooks into his bag, he caught Mr. Thompson's eyes on him, cold, calculating as though the teacher was already planning the next move. Outside the office, his parents were waiting. His mother wrapped an arm around him instantly, whispering, "You did good. You showed them who you are." His father's jaw remained tight, but his eyes carried pride. "They can't bury the truth forever, son. They'll try, but they can't." Marcus wanted to believe that. He wanted to believe his notebooks were enough, his mind undeniable, but inside he felt the unease growing. He had exposed his hidden strength. He had shown them he wasn't just capable, he was exceptional. And that, he realized with a chill, wasn't the end of the fight, it was only raising the stakes. Because the look in Mr. Thompson's eyes wasn't defeat, it was strategy. What Marcus didn't know yet was that his teacher's next move wasn't in the classroom at all. It was on a bigger stage. The statewide math competition. The days after Marcus's meeting with the principal were heavy, but strangely quiet. The gossip in the halls hadn't stopped. He still caught whispers of cheater and show-off when he passed, but it no longer stung the way it had. His notebooks were proof. His demonstration in the office had left no doubt in Mrs. Whitaker's mind. For the first time in weeks, Marcus felt like the ground beneath him might finally be steady. But steady ground was exactly what Mr. Thompson wanted to rip away. It happened on a Monday morning. The students were slouched in their seats, fighting off sleep as the teacher passed out worksheets. The fluorescent lights hummed above, and the clock ticked louder than usual. Everything felt ordinary, until Mr. Thompson cleared his throat and made an announcement. "I've been reviewing opportunities for students to extend themselves beyond this classroom," he said smoothly, his voice carrying the calm authority that always quieted the room. "And I'm pleased to share that one of you has been nominated for the statewide mathematics competition." Heads lifted instantly. Whispers shot across the room. "A math competition? Who'd he pick?" "Bet it's Rachel." Mr. Thompson let the suspense hang before continuing. "This is not a casual contest. It is rigorous. Only the most disciplined minds can handle it. I've carefully considered who among you might rise to the occasion." His eyes swept the room, pausing for effect, before settling on Marcus. "And I've decided to nominate Marcus Johnson." The words landed like a thunderclap. For a heartbeat, the class froze. Then the whispers exploded. "What? Him? No way." After all that? Marcus felt every eye burn into him. His stomach twisted. He didn't move, didn't speak, just sat there gripping his pencil so hard it nearly snapped. Rachel turned slightly in her seat, her eyes meeting his with quiet understanding. She, unlike the others, saw it immediately for what it was, not a gift, but a setup. Mr. Thompson's smile was faint, professional, unreadable. Of course, he continued, this will be a great responsibility. Marcus, you'll be representing not just yourself, but this entire school. The judges will expect precision, discipline, and integrity. The word integrity lingered, heavy with implication. Marcus's chest tightened. He knew what this meant. Mr. Thompson hadn't forgiven his triumph. He hadn't let go of the suspicion. This wasn't about opportunity. It was about exposure. If Marcus failed, it wouldn't just be in front of 30 students. It would be in front of hundreds. Teachers, judges, schools across the state. His failure would be recorded, permanent. At home that night, he told his parent, "They want me to go to a math competition," Marcus said, dropping his backpack onto the kitchen floor. His voice was flat, empty. His mother lit up instantly. "That's wonderful," she said, rushing toward him. "Marcus, this is your chance to show everyone what we already know, that you're brilliant." But Calvin frowned, his instincts sharp. "Hold on," he said slowly. "Who nominated you?" "Mr. Thompson." The name hit the air like a sour note. Evelyn's smile faded. Calvin leaned forward, his voice low. "That man doesn't hand out chances, son. He hands out traps." Marcus lowered his gaze. "I know. He wants me to fail. If I crash there, it won't just be in class. It'll be for everyone to see." Silence filled the kitchen. Then Evelyn placed her hand on her son's shoulder. "So don't crash. If he put you there to humiliate you, take that stage and turn it into your own. Make him regret ever thinking you couldn't." Marcus's throat tightened. "But what if I freeze? What if I let you down?" "You can't let us down," Calvin said firmly. "Not if you're standing in your truth. Failing isn't letting us down. Hiding is." Marcus looked between them, the fear still heavy, but now tangled with something else. Resolve. The next week was a blur of preparation. Marcus spent hours hunched over his desk, working through problems harder than any he had seen before. He filled page after page, sometimes falling asleep with a pencil in his hand. Rachel offered to share old study guides she had saved from her older brother, sliding them across his desk quietly during class. But even with help, the pressure mounted. The whispers at school didn't stop. Some students mocked him openly. "Hope you don't embarrass us, Johnson." Others muttered behind his back, "No way he earned that spot." That the teacher set him up. And deep down, Marcus feared they were right. The day before the competition, Mr. Thompson pulled him aside after class. "You understand the stakes, don't you?" His tone was calm, almost gentle, but the edge was unmistakable. "This isn't like solving problems in your notebook. This is real. Judges, crowds. One mistake, and it will be remembered." Marcus stared at him, fists tightening at his sides. "I'll be ready." Mr. Thompson's smirk was faint. "I hope so, for your sake." Marcus left the classroom with the words echoing like a curse. He knew now more than ever. This wasn't an opportunity. It was a trial. That night he sat at his desk long after midnight, his notebook spread out like battle plans. His hands shook as he turned the pages, scribbling, erasing, scribbling again. He wasn't just preparing for math problems. He was preparing to defend his name, his dignity, his very right to be seen. When he finally looked up at the clock, dawn was breaking. His body was exhausted, but his mind burned with fire. He would go to the competition. He would step onto that stage, because if he didn't, Mr. Thompson would win without lifting a finger. The weeks leading up to the competition unfolded like a relentless storm. Marcus woke before dawn, his eyes burning from lack of sleep, his hands aching from hours spent gripping a pencil. School consumed his days, study consumed his nights, and somewhere in between, he still tried to be the son his parents needed, the one who helped with groceries, who took out the trash, who carried his father's tools in from the car after long shifts at the garage. But there was no rest. The weight of expectation bore down on him from every side. At school, whispers followed him like shadows. Some students mocked him outright. "Hey Johnson, better not embarrass us in front of the whole state." Others were more subtle, smirking when he passed, throwing words like darts, cheater, lucky, flip. And always, in the background, Mr. Thompson's presence loomed. The teacher never raised his voice, never lashed out directly, but his doubt was constant. Every time Marcus answered a question in class, Mr. Thompson added a barb. Close enough. Not bad. For someone who usually struggles. Interesting method. Unorthodox, though. Each comment chipped at Marcus's confidence, planting seeds of unease. He could feel it working. Every solution he wrote, every practice problem he attempted, carried the faint echo of doubt. At home, his parents saw the exhaustion etched into his face. His mother would place a hand on his shoulder as he hunched over his desk, her voice soft but steady. Baby, you've got nothing to prove to that man. Do this for you. His father, watching him grind through problem after problem, finally said one night, "You're building muscle, not the kind in your arms, the kind in your mind. Just don't forget that even muscles need rest to grow." Marcus wanted to believe them, but every time he closed his eyes he saw the stage in his mind's eye. The bright lights, the judges, the crowd waiting for him to falter. He couldn't stop. Rest felt like betrayal. Rachel, too, became part of his rhythm. She slipped him study materials quietly, notes from her older brother, even old competition booklets. Sometimes they stayed after school together in the library, bent over separate tables but close enough to whisper when one stumbled. "You've got this," she would say when his pencil hovered too long. "You're not just good, Marcus. You're better than all of them." Her encouragement helped, but even her voice couldn't drown out the growing fear that no matter how much he prepared, it would never be enough to escape the trap his teacher had laid. The pressure built until it wasn't just academic, it was physical. Marcus's hands cramped from constant writing. His vision blurred late at night, words and numbers doubling on the page. His back ached from hunching over books. He would wake in the morning with equations already racing through his mind, as though even his dreams refused him rest. And still, he pushed forward. Because he knew what failure meant. Failure wasn't just losing a competition. Failure was confirmation. Confirmation of every doubt whispered in the halls. Every smirk on his teacher's face. Every suspicion in the principal's office. It wasn't about math anymore. It was survival. The night before the competition, Marcus sat at his desk with his notebook spread wide, the lamp casting long shadows across the pages. His parents had gone to bed hours ago, but he couldn't stop. He flipped through one problem after another, solving, erasing, starting again. His phone buzzed on the desk. He ignored it at first, then glanced. A new email. The subject line read, "Tomorrow's questions." Marcus frowned. His heart thudded. He opened it. On the screen were pages of equations, dozens of them, complex and carefully typed. The problems were eerily familiar, structured just like the ones he'd been training for. At the top of the document, statewide mathematics competition, confidential materials. His blood ran cold. This wasn't supposed to be in his hands. He knew immediately what it meant. Someone had leaked the competition problems. His first instinct was disbelief. Was it fake? A prank? But the formatting was too precise. The structure too professional. This wasn't random. This was deliberate. And then the horror sank deeper. If he showed up tomorrow and solved these exact problems, it wouldn't matter how many notebooks he had filled, how many nights he had sacrificed. They would accuse him of cheating. Again, his breath quickened, panic rising. Who sent this? Why me? He scrolled down to the sender's address. It wasn't a name he recognized. It was a string of numbers and letters, untraceable, anonymous. But the trap was clear. If he solved the problems, he'd be branded a fraud. If he hesitated, if he underperformed, he'd look like a fluke. Either way, he was cornered. His hands shook as he closed the laptop. He stared at the notebook spread across his desk, the proof of his years of work, the evidence of his brilliance, and realized it might not matter anymore. This wasn't just doubt. This wasn't just a teacher stacking the deck. This was sabotage. The night before the competition, Marcus sat in the dark, the leaked problems glowing in his mind, knowing someone wasn't just setting him up to fail. They were framing him. The auditorium lights burned brighter than Marcus expected. Rows upon rows of seats stretched out before him, filled with students, parents and teachers from across the state. The air buzzed with chatter, 1,000 whispers colliding in the open space. Some eyes were curious, others skeptical, many already judging. On stage, long tables lined with mathletes from different schools waited nervously for the first problem. Judges sat in the front row, clipboards ready, their eyes sharp and expectant. Cameras recorded every movement, every hesitation. Marcus took his seat, his palms damp against the wood of the desk. His chest rose and fell quickly, but his eyes were steady. This wasn't just a competition. This was a trial, and the weight pressing on him wasn't just his own. It was the legacy of every dismissal, every smirk, every accusation. Mr. Thompson stood off to the side, among the coaches. His arms were folded, his face calm, his expression unreadable, but Marcus knew. He knew the teacher wasn't there to support him. He was there to watch him fall. The first problem appeared on the projection screen. Gasps rippled through the room. It was one of the exact equations Marcus had seen in the leaked email. His stomach dropped. His worst fear had materialized. He froze, his pencil hovering above the paper. If I solve this too quickly, they'll think I cheated. If I don't solve it, I'll look incompetent. Whispers floated through the audience. That's impossible. They're testing them with that. No way a high schooler can do it. Marcus closed his eyes briefly, steadying his breath. His father's voice echoed in his head. Don't hide. Don't shrink. Stand in your truth. When he opened his eyes, the panic shifted. The problem wasn't a trap anymore. It was a battlefield, and his weapon was the work he had carved into his notebooks night after night. His pencil scratched across the page. Step 1. Step 2. Step 3. His hand trembled, but his mind burned with clarity. The symmetry emerged again, the hidden structure unfolding just as it had in his room weeks before. Around him, other students stumbled. Erasers scratched furiously. Heads shook. The whispers grew louder. No one's getting this. It's too much. But Marcus's page filled line by line. His focus absolute. The judges leaned forward, watching. One whispered to another, "Is he?" The other shook his head slowly, eyes widening. Marcus's chest ached with the weight of the decision. Should he take the shortcut, the elegant path only he seemed to see, or should he grind step by step to prove his legitimacy? He hesitated, pencil hovering. Then he remembered Mr. Thompson's words. Truth always comes out. For the first time, Marcus wanted to control how it came out. He chose the harder path. He wrote every step, no shortcuts, no skipped logic. He laid it all bare, as if daring anyone to accuse him again. The room grew quieter with each line. The murmurs faded. All eyes turned to him. Rachel, seated in the audience with the other students from his school, clasped her hands tightly. She leaned forward, whispering under her breath, "Come on, Marcus. Show them." Minutes stretched like hours. Sweat slid down Marcus's temple, but his pencil never faltered. His page was messy but complete, the labyrinth undone with patience and grit. Finally, he reached the last step. His pencil pressed hard, carving the answer into the page. He set the pencil down, his chest heaving. The judges stared at his work. One leaned closer, scanning the lines. Another whispered, "Flawless." Gasps rippled through the room as word spread down the rows of tables. Competitors glanced over, some in awe, others in disbelief. For a brief moment, Marcus allowed himself to breathe. He had done it. And then, from the sidelines, Mr. Thompson's voice pierced the air. Calm, professional, but deadly. "Interesting," he said, loud enough for the judges to hear. "Though it is remarkable how Marcus seems to solve problems that coincidentally resemble leaked competition materials." The silence that followed was heavier than before. The judges froze, whispers erupted in the audience. Marcus's victory, seconds old, was already under siege. As Marcus lifted his head, he saw the judges lean forward, not just in awe this time, but in suspicion. The auditorium trembled with whispers. Mr. Thompson's words, measured, calm, yet laced with venom, hung in the air. Remarkable how Marcus seems to solve problems that coincidentally resemble leaked competition materials. The judges leaned in, their expressions sharpening. One whispered to another, their eyes darting between Marcus's paper and the projection screen. The audience stirred, confusion sweeping through the rows like a current. Marcus's throat tightened. His triumph, fragile and fleeting, was already collapsing into suspicion. He could feel it, the tide turning, the disbelief settling back over him, like a suffocating fog. But then something in him hardened. He thought of the nights bent over his notebooks, his mother's voice telling him his mind was a gift, his father's steady reminder, "Don't let them shrink you." He stood, his chair scraped loudly against the stage, cutting through the murmurs. Every head turned. "Excuse me," Marcus said, his voice steady but carrying the edge of fire. "But I didn't cheat. I've been working through problems like this for years. I have the notebooks to prove it." Gasps rippled through the audience. No competitor ever interrupted the judges. No student ever spoke with such conviction on stage. The lead judge, an older man with silver hair and sharp eyes, adjusted his glasses. Notebooks. Marcus nodded. Hundreds of pages. Every night for years. These problems may look impossible, but I've taught myself step by step. I didn't just memorize this. I built the muscle to solve it. His words, raw and unpolished, carried a truth that pierced the air. From the front row, Rachel rose from her seat. He's telling the truth, she called, her voice shaking but strong. I've seen his notebooks. He's been solving problems harder than this for months. The audience turned again, startled. Another voice followed, a boy from Marcus's class, the one who had once mocked him. He solved it in front of us, at school. Step by step. We all saw. Whispers rose, louder now, the doubt cracking. The lead judge leaned forward. Marcus, would you be willing to solve another one you haven't seen before, under timed conditions? Marcus's chest tightened. It was another trap, another demand for proof. But this time he didn't hesitate. Yes, he said firmly. Within minutes, a new problem was projected onto the screen. Different structure, different complexity. Marcus sat again, his pencil in hand, the weight of every eye pressing on him. His hands trembled, but his mind sharpened. Line by line he worked. No shortcuts, no panic, just clarity. 15 minutes later, he set his pencil down. The solution was clean, undeniable. This time, the silence didn't linger. The judges conferred briefly, then one stood. His voice carried across the auditorium. Flawless. This boy is not a cheater. He is a mathematician. The room erupted. Applause thundered through the hall. Students and parents rising to their feet. The audience rose in a standing ovation. Cheers breaking through the walls of doubt. Marcus stood frozen for a moment, the sound washing over him like a wave. He had dreamed of recognition, of being seen, but never like this. Never so loud, never so undeniable. His chest ached with a mix of relief and pride. Off to the side, Mr. Thompson stood stiff, his face pale, his smirk gone. For the first time, the mask of control slipped. He looked smaller, diminished, forced to watch as the boy he had tried to erase stood bathed in applause. Marcus's eyes met his teacher's across the stage. He didn't smile, didn't gloat. He simply held the gaze. That, he knew, was victory enough. The lead judge motioned Marcus forward. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced, we are witnessing something extraordinary. Genius, yes, but more importantly, resilience. Against every doubt, every suspicion, this young man has proven himself with undeniable integrity. The ovation grew louder. Students from rival schools cheered. Parents clapped until their hands stung. Cameras flashed, capturing the boy who had refused to break. Marcus's parents stood in the crowd, tears shining in his mother's eyes, pride burning in his father's. Rachel clapped furiously, her face lit with triumph. For a moment it felt like the world had shifted. For a moment Marcus wasn't invisible. He wasn't dismissed. He was undeniable. But deep inside, he knew applause wasn't the end. Applause was fleeting. What mattered was what came next. What he chose to say in this moment, with every eye and every ear fixed on him. Marcus stepped toward the microphone, the cheers still roaring, knowing the true ending wouldn't be in the solution he wrote, but in the words he was about to deliver. The applause still thundered when Marcus stepped toward the microphone. His legs felt heavy, his chest still rising and falling from the intensity of the last problem. The spotlight burned against his skin, making him both exposed and unmissable. For the first time in his life, all eyes were on him, not with dismissal, not with ridicule, but with expectation. He gripped the sides of the podium, his hands still trembling. The crowd slowly quieted, the roar of clapping fading into a heavy silence. In the corner of his vision, he caught sight of his parents, his mother's hand pressed to her mouth, tears glistening, his father's chin lifted, pride radiating like a shield. Beside them, Rachel leaned forward in her seat, eyes locked on him, silently urging him to speak. Marcus swallowed hard. His throat was tight, but his voice when it came was steady. They'll try to break you, he began, his words carrying into the vast auditorium, but the truth will always solve itself. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The words weren't mathematical, but they carried the weight of an equation Marcus had been solving his whole life. He thought of his father telling him those same words at the kitchen table, grease still on his hands from a long day at the garage. He thought of his mother, whispering that his mind was a gift, even when no one else saw it. He took a deep breath and continued. When I walked into this competition, I knew people didn't believe I belonged here. I've spent years raising my hand in classrooms, being ignored. I've solved problems, only to be told my answers didn't count. I've been told I cheated when the only thing I did was refuse to give up. And when I finally proved I could solve the impossible, they tried to take that from me too. The room was silent, but Marcus felt the energy shifting. People leaned forward, hanging on his words. But I didn't come here today just to prove I could solve an equation, he said. His voice grew stronger, his words deliberate. I came here because I had to show what it means to stand in your truth, even when the world calls it a lie. I came here to show that resilience is louder than doubt, that persistence can outlast prejudice. A murmur of agreement spread through the audience. Even the judges, who moments before had leaned forward with suspicion, now sat back, their faces softened, their eyes fixed on the boy who refused to break. Marcus's gaze swept the room. He let his eyes linger on Mr. Thompson, who stood at the side of the stage, rigid and pale. For once the teacher's smirk was gone. In its place was silence, a silence Marcus had lived under for too long. But now, for the first time, it was his to command. I wasn't supposed to succeed, Marcus said, his voice steady. I wasn't supposed to stand here. The truth is, people like me, students who are doubted, dismissed, told to stay in their place, we're not supposed to be seen. But I am here, and I solved the problem they said couldn't be solved. Applause began again, not a roar this time, but a steady rhythm, growing louder with every second. Marcus lifted his hand slightly, asking for quiet. But this isn't just about me, he said, his voice soft but sharp. Because right now, somewhere in another classroom, there's another student with their hand raised, waiting to be called on. There's another voice being ignored, another notebook being filled in silence. And the question is, how many of those voices will never get the chance to be heard? The crowd fell into silence again. His words hovered, heavy and undeniable. Marcus stepped back from the microphone. He didn't need to say more. The truth had solved itself. In the audience, his mother's tears spilled freely, her hands clasped together in gratitude. His father's jaw tightened with pride, his eyes gleaming. Rachel wiped her face discreetly, clapping until her palms stung. On stage, the judges rose to their feet, leading the crowd into another standing ovation. Cameras flashed, recording the moment that would outlive the day. And in the shadows, Mr. Thompson remained still, his authority stripped, forced to watch the boy he tried to erase become undeniable in the very spotlight he had hoped would destroy him. Yet as the applause roared, the question Marcus had asked hung heavier than the noise. How many voices like his were still being silenced, unseen, waiting for their truth to be solved? Stories like Marcus's happen every day, brilliance ignored, voices silenced, truths buried. If you believe no student should be doubted because of the color of their skin, type yes in the comments. And if this broke your heart, subscribe so these stories are never forgotten.